You don't carry a gun. You don't shout orders. You don't sit at the head of long marble tables. In fact, most of the men who appear powerful on television have never heard your name. But their empires breathe because you allow oxygen to move. And oxygen, in your world, is money. It started quietly. 10 years ago, you were just another financial analyst buried inside a New York investment firm, staring at spreadsheets that didn't belong to ordinary clients. The numbers were too clean, too coordinated. Entire shell corporations appearing overnight, dissolving within weeks, millions flowing through them like water through invisible pipes. You weren't supposed to notice the pattern, but you did. And instead of reporting it, you mapped it. You discovered something bigger than tax evasion, bigger than drug money, bigger than political bribes. There wasn't just one organization moving black money. There was a system. Layered offshore accounts, private equity funds, crypto tumblers, art auctions, shipping invoices, disaster relief funds. It wasn't chaos, it was architecture. And architecture means there is an architect. You didn't expose it, you improved it. At first, you optimized transfers, reduced detection windows, built time delay algorithms so funds never crossed borders directly. You created false volatility in markets to hide billion-dollar movements inside economic noise. Governments blamed inflation. Regulators blamed speculation. Economists debated theories on television. Meanwhile, you were building the most efficient underground financial highway the world had ever seen. The first time they contacted you, it wasn't a threat. It was a job offer. A blank phone delivered to your apartment. No number saved. Just one message. We know you understand the system. We want you to redesign it. You could have gone to the FBI. You could have disappeared. But curiosity is stronger than fear. You attended the meeting, not in a warehouse, not in some cinematic bunker, a private dining room in Manhattan. 3 people, no introductions, no raised voices. They spoke like executives discussing quarterly returns. They didn't represent one cartel, one mafia, or one nation. They represented liquidity, conflict zones, sanctioned oligarchs, defense contractors, political campaigns, tech founders needing silent investors. Separate on the surface, connected underneath. And they needed a conductor. You didn't join a gang. You became the central processor of global illicit capital. You redesigned everything, fragmented transactions across continents in milliseconds, created artificial losses in legitimate corporations to mask incoming black funds, embedded laundering mechanisms inside humanitarian aid pipelines so no auditor could question tragedy, engineered synthetic identities that owned companies, that owned trusts, that owned debt, that funded governments. Within 3 years, you weren't just hiding money, you were steering it. A war breaks out, you know before the headlines, because defense stock quietly rises 0.3% in one obscure exchange. A politician campaigns on anti-corruption, you see the sudden stop in offshore transfers backing his opponent. A cartel leader disappears, you detect the freeze in cocaine futures disguised inside agricultural trades. You don't read the news reacts to your spreadsheets. But power like that doesn't stay invisible forever. The first problem wasn't law enforcement, it was ambition. A Russian syndicate wanted priority routing, faster clearing times for sanctioned funds. An Asian triad demanded exclusivity over Pacific crypto exchanges. A South American network threatened to bypass your structure entirely and build their own pipeline. They thought the system was a tool. They didn't realize you were the system. You didn't threaten them. You adjusted liquidity. Suddenly, their transfers slowed. Transactions flagged. Delays cost them millions. They came back compliant, not because you were violent, because you controlled circulation. Money is blood. You controlled the heartbeat. Then came the Americans, not agents in suits, not raids, something quieter. An internal treasury algorithm began detecting ghost volatility patterns, distortions only someone extremely intelligent would notice. Someone inside the regulatory machine was studying your fingerprints. They didn't know your name, but they knew someone was bending global markets with intention. For the first time, you felt something unfamiliar: pressure. You tightened your network, reduced exposure, initiated burn protocols, erasing shell corporations, collapsing synthetic identities, rerouting through African micro-banking systems and Middle Eastern commodity trades. Then the message arrived, not from criminals, from Washington. A secure, encrypted file appeared inside a private node only 5 people in the world could access, and you were one of them. Inside the file was a single sentence: "We know what you built. We need it." That's when you understood something terrifying. You thought you were hiding from governments. Governments were studying you, and now they wanted in. They didn't want to arrest you. They wanted leverage, silent economic warfare, off-book funding, election influence without fingerprints. You weren't being hunted. You were being recruited. And here is the moment everything changed. If criminals use black money for power and governments use black money for stability, what happens when the same person controls both? You became the bridge, not out of loyalty, out of logic. If one side collapses the system, everyone loses. So you balance them, fed information selectively, slowed certain transfers, accelerated others, prevented wars by starving them of liquidity, enabled others when profit margins were too high for anyone to resist. You didn't just control money anymore. You controlled outcomes. Global crises became variables. Regime changes became spreadsheets. Market crashes became strategic resets. But power like that isolates you. You can't tell friends what you do. You can't trust partners. Every handshake becomes a risk assessment. Every dinner conversation becomes potential surveillance. You sleep lightly, not because someone might break in, but because someone might understand. And then the fracture happened. You discovered something hidden inside your own architecture, a shadow wallet, a master reserve, billions accumulating slowly outside even your tracking systems. Someone had embedded it years ago before you took control, which means you were never the top. Someone designed the original skeleton of the system. Someone allowed you to refine it. Someone watched you scale it. And now that shadow account is active. Funds are moving without your authorization, carefully, intelligently, just like you would. You try to trace it, but every route collapses into dead ends. Quantum encryption, cold storage vaults, nation-state obfuscation. Then your private device vibrates. Unknown channel. You've done well maintaining the bloodstream. Now it's time to understand who owns the body. For the first time in 10 years, you're not in control. And somewhere in a room you've never seen, someone is reviewing your performance the same way you review global markets, calmly, objectively, deciding whether you're still necessary. The scariest part, you don't know if you were the architect or just another component. And they're watching, not to stop you, not to replace you, but to measure you. Power doesn't eliminate variables, it studies them. You always believed intelligence was your greatest weapon, pattern recognition, modeling, emotional detachment. But what if you were predicted? What if the mistake in those spreadsheets was planted? What if the blank phone was phase 2 of a design that began long before you noticed the architecture? You open the shadow wallet again, not to trace it, but to understand it. The transactions aren't random, they're philosophical. Money flows toward instability before instability happens. Currencies shift days before elections collapse. Rare earth minerals spike before diplomatic tensions surface. Insurance derivatives activate before hurricanes form. This isn't laundering, this is forecasting. Someone isn't reacting to the world, they're steering probability itself. And suddenly, a horrifying possibility forms in your mind. You optimized corruption. They optimized civilization. You zoom out, decades of anomalies, financial crises, liquidity injections, bubbles, collapses, relief accelerations. There are fingerprints, subtle, mathematical, elegant, the same distortion pattern you use, only older. You were never the first architect. You were the apprentice who thought he built the cathedral. Your device vibrates again. Control is not ownership. You manage motion. We design gravity. Gravity. You moved money. Gravity decides where it falls. You test the limits, reroute a sovereign wealth transfer. Within seconds, counterpressure emerges from unrelated markets. Your reroute corrects itself automatically, like a body healing a cut. You feel it.
You are inside something alive, and it has an immune system. For years, you believed governments were fragmented, cartels competitive, corporations selfish. But at the highest altitude, conflict is choreography. Wars stimulate innovation, crashes reset debt cycles, sanctions reorganize supply chains, energy shortages accelerate transitions. Chaos isn't always failure, sometimes it's recalibration. You were directing percussion, someone else holds the full score. You receive coordinates, an invitation, a building owned by trusts you once designed. Inside, one person waits, calm, precise. They say, "We are continuity." Not a name, a function. A consortium embedded across central banks, think tanks, energy councils, sovereign funds, technology standards committees. Not ruling the world, preventing it from collapsing too fast. Balance requires asymmetry at the top. They show simulations, timelines where your greed won.
Millions were displaced, markets shattered, supply chains broke for a decade. You weren't just moving money, you were stress-testing civilization. They told you that you could remain a brilliant subsystem or finally see the full architecture. At your level, power had felt absolute. At theirs, it felt patient. You optimized quarterly flows. They managed centuries. Projections filled the screen. Climate migration, AI displacement, debt saturation, water scarcity. Survival, they said. Not national survival, civilizational survival. You laundered money for efficiency. They distorted markets to buy time. But who decides what humanity looks like when it survives? They didn't just stabilize systems, they selected outcomes. Which technologies rise, which leaders fail, which currencies fade, which ideologies trend. Soft influence, long arcs, invisible hands guiding visible history. You asked what would happen if you refused. Refusal is a decision. Decisions have outcomes. You realized you weren't recruited. You were evaluated, and you passed. But passing didn't mean freedom. It meant promotion. If you joined, you would stop reacting to crises and start shaping inevitabilities. Before, you balanced criminals and governments. Now you were asked to balance humanity against itself, deciding which collapses were necessary, which pains tolerable, which sacrifices statistically acceptable. For the first time in a decade, you weren't calculating profit, you were calculating legacy. You agreed, demanding transparency. Transparency is earned, they replied. You'll prove you deserve to see what's above us. Of course, there was another layer. Systems this complex don't end, they ascend. As you left, your device updated. Phase expansion. You were no longer protecting the bloodstream. You were helping design evolution, and evolution is never gentle. Back home, your blank phone lit up one last time. Welcome to gravity. Fade to black. Now you understood. The world isn't run by the loudest voices, the richest men, or the strongest armies. It's guided by those who understand flow, pressure, timing, and above them, those who understand direction. So the question lingers long after the screen goes dark. If stability requires manipulation, if peace requires invisible hands, if survival demands controlled chaos, is it corruption or is it leadership? Because somewhere, right now, money is moving, markets are adjusting, conflicts are calibrating, and someone is deciding how much future the world is allowed to have.